So we've just heard from Matthew chapter 5, from the Sermon on the Mount, as Jesus is beginning to talk about what it means to be a part of his kingdom. And you heard over and over again, you heard it 9 times, and then there's this insinuation in the 10th time of this idea of being blessed. And you, like so many people throughout history, can hear that, and you can start to say, oh, here is the good, moral, loving teaching of Jesus. And if I can just grab some of these concepts, understand them and apply them to my life, I can be a better person, a nicer person, a good contributor to society. But don't you see that Jesus is saying something that is so much more than that? He is saying that at the very core of who you are, at the very core of who everyone is, there is this desire. And it is so basic and so fundamental that you won't even know it and how much you long for it. And that in many ways, how you believe that it can be acquired affects the way that you think, affects the way that you act. It even affects the way that you live your life. That ultimately you long to be blessed. That you long to be accepted, to be loved, to find favor with people. And even when we look just at the things that this text says, you're like, oh yeah, those are all things that I want in my life. Don't you want to be a person who is comforted? Don't you want a person who is given mercy? Don't you want to be a person who can inherit the earth, right? That idea that the whole world is yours. And even culturally, we gravitate to what? We gravitate to stories. We see it in our movies. We see it in our TV shows. We see it even on the news. We gravitate to what? To stories of people who are succeeding, who are overcoming, right? That person who everything is against them, and somehow they are able to prove themselves and they are able to find success. And everybody's like, oh, that is a good life. That gives them value. And whether you see it or not, this longing to be blessed, this longing to be accepted, it affects you. We see it in the overachiever, right? The overachiever who is constantly pressing to be as successful as possible, to get as much done as they possibly can, because they believe that somehow by proving themselves, by being this very good person who knows and who's successful, that other people will go, oh, you're good. You have value. And sometimes with those overachievers, you hear this story of how they longed to hear from somebody, from their parents, that you're loved, that you're good enough. They'll even have stories about how they came home with 95% on their test, and their parents say to them, well, what happened to the other 5%, right? And it just tells them that, oh, until I am perfect enough, I just got to keep achieving and keep achieving and keep achieving. But even though you might look at them and say, wow, you are so successful, is there ever really blessedness? Right? Because you only feel successful as your next A, as your next success, as your next victory. On the other side of the coin, you have the person who self-sabotages, who everything starts to go well, and then all of a sudden they do something to completely destroy it, to completely throw it off. And really, it's the exact same thing. It's just doing it a different way. They look and they say, well, I don't believe that I will ever be accepted, that I will ever be loved, that I will ever have what I'm supposed to have. So I blow it up before I just am not able to achieve it. And that way, I don't constantly feel like a failure. I don't constantly feel unworthy because I've destroyed it myself. For me, maybe for others, it's that procrastination, right? That idea of like, you do it at the last second so that you can only give what you can give in those last few final moments, because you believe that if you were to actually do it beforehand and give your best, that your best still wouldn't be that good. So you wait until the last second so that you can't actually fully give your best. And then people can be like, oh, that was good. And you feel like, well, I could have given better. Right? There's this longing in us. There is this longing for us to be a people who are blessed. Now, Jesus is giving this first sermon, and his sermons are really this invitation into his kingdom. And it parallels Moses, right? He comes to where? To a mountain like Moses, receiving and giving the law. He comes and sits, right? And for the teachers, for the rabbis, they call that the posture of Moses, or the seat of Moses. The teacher sits and the people come around him and listen to him. And Jesus comes to his disciples and he begins to teach them. And the crowd kind of gathers in. And it's kind of like this idea that it's offering his teaching to anybody who is willing to come and to listen to him. And what he says is he says that there is a blessing you can receive, but this blessing is so radically different than the way the world tries to achieve blessing that it can actually come across as offensive and easily rejected. But for those who buy into it, it can become incredibly empowering and freeing. And so there's three ways we're going to see that the kingdom is laid out as being this opportunity for blessing. We're going to see that we receive blessings as we understand who we are before the king, who we are because of the king, and who we are with the king. The first way we can find blessedness in this kingdom that Jesus is laying out is when we understand who we are before the king. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, Luke, when he is using these Beatitudes, he doesn't do them exactly the same way that Matthew does, and there's debate over what that means or why it was done that way, but really, in my opinion, Jesus would have given this sermon more than once, and so he might have changed it up or did it slightly differently at different times. But Luke just says, "Blessed are the poor." And all of us can see how radically different that is than the way of the world, right? Because we know that the life of the poor is hard. That it's hard because the poor move from meal to meal, from moment to moment. They can only really live in the present. They can only get what is right in front of them. There's no opportunity to plan, to save, to move towards something better. In fact, if they're really poor, they're stuck there until a benefactor comes and gives them enough money that they can get a leg up and begin to have a slightly better life. And Matthew, when he's quoting Jesus here, he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." And really what that is saying is that it's saying that we need to understand that we are spiritually poor. That there is nothing in us, nothing in our striving, nothing in our desire to make ourselves as good as we possibly can that will ever make us fully acceptable. And when we understand how spiritually poor we are, then we can begin to go towards a God who says that he sees our spiritual poverty and he accepts us and he offers us what? He offers us entrance into his kingdom, into the kingdom of heaven. See, you're striving, you're succeeding, you're proving yourself to other people. You don't have to do that anymore because you are poor and there is no way you could ever do it. You can only do it if you are invited in, if you are accepted by the king. And when you have that kind of acceptance, that kind of sense of really deep, deep, deep love, that at your poverty, at the place where you have nothing else, that you are taken in. See, nobody can take that away. Nobody can take it away because you're not like, well, it's because I was so good. Oh, really, you're not that good. Oh, then it's taken away. It's because I achieved so much. Oh, really? You're not really that successful, or that achievement has been taken, or you've been fired, or somebody has dumped you. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's taken away. But when you have nothing and then you're loved, when you have nothing and then you're brought in, when you have nothing and then you're accepted, see, people can't take that away. It's secure. You feel blessed in it. He says, before the king, you come towards him and you recognize that there is a mourning. And then he says, when you come and you mourn, you're comforted. It's two things clashing with each other, right? That idea of blessed, that joyful happiness, the sense that you are secure, that you're seen as being of value, right? How can you feel that when you're really mourning? When you really are in the midst of pain and loss and suffering? I mean, even in our church, we've just learned of the passing on of one of our dear saints. Somebody who, if you knew him, you were blessed by his life, that he was a great encourager. And even at 91 or 92 years old, he would walk into a room and he was frail and weak and soft-spoken, but he was this giant who made you feel loved. And so we think of the loss and how there's a pain in that, and a pain for the family, and that it's only when you can begin to mourn, only when you begin to weep, that you can ever actually find comfort, because then other people can come around you. They can just sit with you. They can let you know that it is all right to feel that pain. But when we really understand that first blessedness of our poverty of spirit, and we begin to understand how difficult it is to come out of it, and we begin to mourn it, there is a blessing in the fact that God himself comes beside us, sits with us, and he looks at us, and he says, you're accepted. It is okay to mourn the brutalness of your sin and the brutalness of your failure, because I'm going to accept you. And there you find complete acceptance and incredible comfort. If all we had was the revelation that we are completely poor, and never the one who comes along and accepts and gives us comfort, then it would actually be a continued suffering. But because we have the one who comes into our poverty and accepts us, that in that mourning, in that grieving our failures, there's a sense of really deep comfort. He says, there's a blessedness when you are meek. Meek, automatically you start to think of weak, that it's this person who's kind of to the side, and that they're walked over, and all those images begin to just come through. But actually what the word is saying is that there's strength that is under submission, that is strength that even though it has the power to do things, it submits to something that is better in order to do what is actually good. That it starts to say, well, I can be used for the advantage of others rather than for the advantage of myself. It's this image of a wild horse that has all of this power, that can do incredible things, but if it cannot be tamed, if it cannot accept the leading of its master, then it's not useful, one, to be ridden, or to do the great things that horses have been able to do throughout history. And so, in meekness, it's that strength under submission to a good and towards a loving God that allows us to go and to do great things, not for our glory, but for his, right? For him. When we think about those things, we think about who we are before the King, that we realize that we're poor, that we're a people who mourn, and that we need to be under his authority and his submission. That's where we find our blessedness. Then we find that we're blessed because of our King. He says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Right? That idea of hungering and thirsting, that you see that it's actually, you want it so bad that it's painful. To really hunger for something, to really thirst for something, means that you want that more than you want anything else, and that you are constantly willing to count the cost in order to go and to get and to receive that thing. And it says that you long for the righteousness, and that as you long for it, you will actually find that it's given to you. Now notice here that it says that you long for righteousness and not for justice. You see, justice is when we begin to look at the things that are around us, we begin to look at the world around us, we begin to look at the wrongs that have been done to us, and we begin to say, I want those things to be made right. Right? Or I want those things to be corrected. I want those things to be changed. But righteousness, the hunger and thirst for righteousness, is to say, what needs to change in me for me to be the kind of person that honors and that glorifies the King? And that we are made right because of what he did. In 2 Corinthians 5:21, the Apostle Paul says this. It says that God made him being Jesus, who knew no sin, to become sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. This longing, this desire to become righteous is only found in Jesus Christ. And so when we come and we say, I just want to be a person who is good, I want to be a person who longs to see God glorified in my life, who has victory over sin, who moves from kindness and gentleness to more kindness and more gentleness, right? If you're that kind of person, he says, if you actually seek after that, you will receive it. Why? Because Christ came. He died for your sin. And in dying for your sin, he gives you his righteousness. Because remember, your righteousness, your poverty can never correct your mistakes. It's because of him. It's because of him that you are made whole. And you find complete blessing, not in your identity, but in his. And his identity calling you into his kingdom. And then he says, blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. If you actually understand that you have received a righteousness from God, through God, given to you, not because of your merit, but because of his love and because of his grace, then your only response is to be one who turns around and gives mercy. And if you are a person who lives in giving mercy and grace to other people, you will constantly be given mercy and grace back to you. Many of you will have either read the book or watched the musical or watched the movie adaptations of Les Miserables. And the main character in that story is this man Valjean. And his life story is a story about him fleeing from one man who is chasing after him for a minor indiscretion in his life, a wrong that he had done. And he's pursued and pursued and pursued by Javert. And he gets to this point where Javert has come against the rebels, and he's been caught, and Valjean is given Javert's life. And he's at this place where he has every right to exact justice on a man who has treated him unfairly. But because he had received unmerited mercy at a point in his life where he should have went to jail for a crime he definitely committed, but the priest that he stole from said, no, I give it to you as a gift. Because he received unmerited mercy, his response to his enemy is to give mercy, is to give grace, is to give forgiveness. When you understand how great is the mercy that has been given to you, then you live a life that is merciful. And it's completely, completely blessed. Jesus says, blessed are the pure in heart. Why? Because they'll actually see God. And we like to say it like this. It's this quote from John Piper. We've said it over and over again. But it's really just simply, when Christ is your heart's desire, God will give you the desire of your heart. When your heart is so pure that it just longs for God in every aspect of your life, and everything that you do, and everything that you want to be, then you begin to have such a rich encounter with him that Scripture says you're actually learning to walk by the Spirit. And as you learn to walk by the Spirit, you begin to see the flowing of God in your life, and you begin to see yourself transformed into a person who knows joy and peace and patience and goodness, self-control and perseverance. And there's this real sense that you begin to see God, and God begins to be reflected in who you are. What we're seeing is we're seeing this progression of being blessed because we're before the King, blessed because of what the King did, and now we are blessed as we move on with the King. He says, blessed are the peacemakers. Ultimately, that is what Jesus is doing. He's entering into a world that is full of political, emotional, and more importantly, spiritual turmoil. And he's bringing his kingdom, which is a one of peace between our warring, rebellious selves and God. And he says, blessed are you when you can be the one who can enter into the warring situation, and you can show mercy because you've received mercy. You can show that you're not dependent on your own ability, but on the love and security that there is in a God who loves you in all of your brokenness. He says that when you're able to do that, you enter into the tumultuous world with a sense of real belonging. And that with him, you bring peace into other people's lives. You begin to enter into the darkness, he will say later, and you start to offer up light so that other people can see the truth. And that you become what? You become seen as a child of God. When you become seen as a child of God, you are working with God to see his kingdom come in all of its fullness. So you are so utterly secure that it doesn't matter what happens to you, you can offer grace, mercy, and peace in any situation. And so Jesus goes on and he finishes with this idea of blessed are you because you are persecuted for rightness' sake or righteousness' sake. Right? The people that Matthew, the evangelist, is writing to are people who are constantly experiencing persecution. That there are people who, just because they choose Jesus as their God and Jesus as their Lord, are actually suffering. And Jesus says to those people, he's saying that there is a blessing, there is a sense of belonging, there is a sense of love, there is a sense of utter security. Because you are being persecuted not because you're a jerk and people have to put you in your place. You're being persecuted because you are choosing the kingdom of God over a world that is completely against the kingdom of God, who believes that the weak should be pushed aside and the strong should inherit the earth, that believe that survival of the fittest is the way of the world. And God says, no, actually, that there is a sense of real blessedness when you can take what the world throws at you and be completely and utterly secure, right? When we are completely secure in the kingdom that you know that you are utterly accepted despite your complete poverty. Because you have been comforted at the very core of who you are. Because you have hungered and you have thirsted and you have met and you have experienced the mercy and your heart's longing has been given to you because you have encountered the living God. Then you can not only just endure other people's persecution, other people's rejection, but you can actually, like the apostles, begin to say, I have been counted worthy to say that I am a child of God. And that Jesus says, you will what? You will rejoice in your persecution. Rejoice in knowing that God is your comfort, and that when he is your comfort, when he is your benefactor, when he is your righteousness, that you are blessed because nobody can ever take that away. Nobody can take that away. You are completely secure, and your circumstances don't matter. And that is a life that can be lived with comfort and with hope now and for eternity. Let's pray. God, we know that you are good. We know that you are loving. And we know that Jesus is laying out for us a kingdom that is completely different. That he is calling us to take our strength and to submit it to you and to your kingdom, so that we might be able to go and to love and to see your peace come to a very broken world. But God, even more than that, we know that we are utterly and perfectly loved. Because Jesus didn't call out our righteousness, and that he didn't make us pay for our injustice, but because he gave us his mercy, because he gave us his forgiveness and his grace. And we know that we are accepted, that we are loved.